Bucky Leo with a man's dilemma. Well, I want to welcome you to Pschiatry. My name is Freestyle, each and every day here except for Mondays, bringing you What Are You Saying, where we speak to different people from around the world, different walks of life, just to get their ideas and opinions on their profession, as well as how we're coping with this pandemonium crisis. All right. And today here, I hope this conversation will help us to manage our mental health situation, our spiritual health, and and our well-being. Because it's someone who was born, Mr. Kenneth, I'm speaking to. He was born and raised on the Caribbean island of St. Eustatius. That is a Dutch, at least, and he worked from 2014 July to July 2017 in the position of Windward Island Clinical Manager for St. Eustatius and Saba at the Foundation Mental Health Caribbean. That's the MHC, Dutch Caribbean. He's also one of the main founder of Foundation Mental Health Caribbean, the FMHC, the Foundation Mental Health Caribbean. Also, Mr. Kenneth works for Novedik, the Kentron, that is the largest institution for psychiatric and addiction care in the Netherlands. And also is a social psychiatrist nurse, specialise in psychiatric addiction and psychoeducation. And I want to welcome him here on Pschiatry Radio. And I hope our conversation will benefit our listeners. And also, if you have any question that you want to ask to Kenneth Cuvalay, please do so on +44 730 541 7668. You can send in your text messages via WhatsApp also. So welcome here, Mr. Kenneth Cuvalay.
Good evening, Freestyle. And firstly, I would like to thank you for giving me this opportunity to engage with the community in the UK at large, and to welcome them to have a proactive conversation on the different and various subjects which we are intended to go through. It's my pleasure to engage with your community just over the channel. I've been coming to the UK on many occasions over the past 30 to almost 40 years since I'm living in Europe. And thank you for the introduction. To give a short illustration of my bio history. Indeed, I am very much specialized for many years in the psychiatrical and addiction treatment, and also indeed specialize in psychological emotional distress education. Secondly, I would like to thank you, Freestyle, for making this moment possible as well. Very much delighted, and it's my pleasure to contribute in whatever way to the community at large, but also in particularly our African community within the UK in particular, because we know in times of crisis and outside of times of crisis, our community are most vulnerable at most times in regard to a lot of social, economical circumstances. And I do believe in the world of COVID-19 at this point in time. It posed a potential threat to a lot of our members living in the African community, not only in the UK, but throughout the world at large. And we will go through those different areas of why our people are so vulnerable globally in this time in the new world which we are living in, which we call COVID-19. And so also would like to say that COVID-19 of itself pose and constitute a potential aspect of stress which leads to fear and mental and psychological and physical problems. So we're going to go through those elements. And again, I thank you for your presentation and inviting me to make this possible.
You're welcome, sir. And I know I was just giving a little brief about your medical background. But as time goes by, people will get to know more and check you out and see what you've done in the past. But I welcome you here on Prosperity Radio. I know that couple of hours or so is not enough to deal with the situation that we're going to be looking at. So what we've decided, or what I've decided to do here, because since it's a very vital information, one that we need a supplement for our mental and spiritual progression, especially going forward, is thereby have you here on a weekly basis. And at least, the more people know that a consistent flow of information or supplement to make their life healthier and better. And I think that is something that one will subscribe to. So, and I thank you for taking that opportunity to give us some of your expert advice on how to deal with relative issues and stress, anxiety, and so on, that will help us move forward. We're talking about the you've just mentioned the COVID-19. And before that, I just want you to paint a picture for us, because here in the UK it's quite dry. The roads are fairly empty. No businesses opening except for little shops that you can buy food, and some big grocery shops that you can go and get food. Apart from that, social life is all locked up and closed off. What is the scene over there in the Netherlands?
Well, the scene in the Netherlands, they chose for what they call an intelligent shutdown, which means to say, once people adopt and carry out the 1.5 meter distance and washing of hands and the limited amount of people who has access to enter supermarkets, etc., people can be daytime and nighttime once they are not actually in overcrowded groups or anything like that. People can be on the street, which in other words mean to say, if you have your house circle and you're on the road with your child, your wife and your children, you will have to prove that those people are belonging to that one address as well. Schools and restaurants and sporting facilities such as clubs and bars and that sort of things has been shut down. Today they just extend the intelligent shutdown until the 19th of May approximately, with giving some relaxation to the youth to go back to school with certain amount of restriction, how they need to be actually conducting themselves in school. The youth in this case is from 12 up until 19 approximately of age. Yeah, schools, young people between the age of 12 and 19 are allowed to go back to schools. They can play on the sporting fields within the school community, and they have a amount of restriction to how long the hours may be, but they are relaxing the youth between that age, as I said, to go back to school. Restaurant openly to the public are been shut down for some time, bars as well. And as such, those facilities continue to be closed down until, again, the 19th of May. Today, the government really extended the intelligent form of shutdown which we speak about. So in the Netherlands, we doesn't experience the streets are totally abandoned from activities as in the UK.
And also, you mentioned there a word where you says intelligent lockdown. I mean, why do you refer to the lockdown as intelligent?
Well, I guess that's the Dutch government way of defining it in relation to
Right.
how they distinguish themselves from, for instance, France or the UK.
Right.
They found their finding is that, and the advice which they get from their expert, seeing the Dutch community, it is better off in order not to completely have the economical structure collapse in a huge and aggressive form, that this form of intelligence will better suit the Dutch community. And also entering of supermarkets and so are limited as to how many people can enter at the time. So this seems to be working according to the Dutch government perfectly well for the Dutch community as it's confronted.
All right. Okay. Now it's clear. I see why you're referring to it as intelligent lockdown. I mean, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. And also, you talk about people adapting. I can see why you mentioned the word adapt. I mean, in a sense, you're saying they're complying gradually with the lockdown.
Yes. Although that lockdown is posing and constituting a lot of what you will call psychological, emotional distress and fear. As a matter of fact, not only the lockdown, the reality of COVID-19 of itself constitute these problems because there's a lot of uncertainty, and there is, with that uncertainty and a huge amount of people, as well as in the UK and I guess globally, have been losing their jobs. Businesses are collapsing constantly. So in that capacity, you are seeing people to an extent adopting with this sort of intelligent shutdown, but at the same time, there's huge amount of fear and anxiety in communities at large.
I mean, also, some of these fears and anxiety building up in people is the fact that the stream of information that they're receiving is very complex, and therefore one cannot comprehend such a complex information at the same time trying to take care of their well-being and their family and also supporting vulnerable people. That is a very difficult position to be in.
That is an extremely difficult position to be in. And indeed, the complex overload on information from social media and otherwise government institution as well, whereof sometimes the information is contradictable to previous explanation, is continuing to have an impact on community at large. And indeed, if you are not in a position to explain some of these information clearly in a more simpler context to community in a larger sense will be then confronted with more fear and anxiety, etc., because of the lacking of understanding. And I think in this period which we are living in, it's very much important to actually try to give accurate information which can constitute a sense of calming and constitute a sense of safety and promote safety feelings among people as well. So I think this program which we are engaging with from your side, Freestyle, are attempting to do some of those things and bring more clarity to the community as well.
Yes, indeed. I mean, we're going to look at stress and, signs of stress and how you can really pick out some of those signs. But when we talk of stress, is in itself at the moment is compounded with so many different factors. Yesterday, for example, I don't know, it's not, probably it's kind of a subtle one for me. I'll tell you what happened. In about, say, 2 a.m. in the morning, everywhere is cleared out. There is no one on the street. There is no cars. You will hear a car sound and maybe a car go past, every 5 or 10, 15 minutes. However, I keep hearing siren, like the ambulance. At that
Yeah.
time of the morning with the siren on. I mean, like, I'm thinking, but why? Why would they put up a siren so late at night? I mean, that morning where there is virtually nothing on the road. I mean, is that part of creating an anxiety?
Well, sure. Well, sure. The picture, the image which we are experiencing, like you said, the streets are total abandoned. As a matter of fact, as if there's no human being anymore living in the community or in the city. And at the same time, you are hearing all of these sirens passing and going. And in the Netherlands, you're hearing that as well, including the helicopters above you in the sky. And people are then wondering, well, what is happening? Because they have no insight, they have no grip on the situation. And all of these different sounds and from authority point of view and so forth are leading people to wonder what is really going on, and it do strengthen a notion of fear into people's psychological state of mind.
Indeed. So when we talk of because at the moment, what is really gripping all of us, it's anxiety. One way or the other. I mean, some people can deal with it better than others, some can't. And at the same time, it's very difficult to advise ones to stop watching the news, because some people rely on the news to give them what they really want to hear. And some people don't watch the news, they don't have televisions. But at the same time, you're on social media and you can't escape all this information coming through. Sometimes you choose to say, well, I will listen to that, listen to this. At the same time, all of them carries some amount of fear, warning, something to make you comply with what you don't really understand. I mean, those kind of anxiety, as a psychiatrist, how would you begin to encourage one to disarm themselves from such a multitude of media complex information?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Before we have misunderstanding, I'm not a specialist in psychiatry. As a medical specialist, we have to make a distinction into that. I started out as a nurse and intensive care, specialized as a social psychiatrical nurse, and went on to specialize myself in the area more deeper of psychiatry, addiction, and psychological emotional distress. Although at the same time, my studies are including a level of medical studies at the same time. But I am not a medical doctor in that sense, so I need to make that clear. Your question was in relation to anxiety, I think?
Yes, I mean, to manage the anxiety and stress, because like I said,
Right.
people can't stop watching the news. People can't stop watching their social media to get information, to know what is happening. Some people want to know when this is going to end. I mean, speculation. So it's a different way we're bringing all these anxiety and stress into our well-being, and it's really having an impact on our sleeping pattern, even though we're not at work. So what sort of ways in which you can help someone who can't help them?
Well, there's a range of ways we can try to tackle the situation and help others. And one of the main thing I also stress on to our community, which they need to take note of, is to be very selective with what type of information, how long they are busy with information, so that you don't get overload with information. Now, we know that the internet exposure is one of the instruments nowadays, and our telephones with social media, etc., in gathering information. There's where a lot of danger lies in relation to overloading your brains with information, because when your brains start getting overloaded with information, you cease to actually be focused and in control, whereof the fear factor kicks in more than ever, because you are not in control as you should be with your family members or with yourself. So we need to avoid how difficult it may be being consumed by information. And if you do have information or exposed to information, you should try and analyze it intelligently. Now, to answer your question, what kind of tips you can actually help each other with, like I said, one of the things, again, you have to accept in this reality of COVID-19 world which we are living in, accept that there are events that you cannot control. The fear also is triggered because of the fact that you need the feeling to be in control constantly. Now, with the COVID world and reality which we are living in, we just does not have that control on that situation. So it's a matter of adapting and being creative and avoid distractions, for instance. And instead of actually being preoccupied with information bombarded, try learning how you can maintain your life as it was always be to that degree. Although I need to emphasize we are living in this, for instance, in the UK with a total lockdown, whereof we are speaking of limited mobility, which actually constitute again a level of anxiety because of isolation of itself. And so within that isolation, you're going to have to find creative ways to adapt into that situation. And one of the ways is maintaining your daily life, which you used to go about, like cooking, being in contact with your children, try meditating if you have the time for that, to release stress, relaxation technique. Use the social media more effectively to actually relate with your family members who you are not really close by, but via internet or your social media instrument, you can actually connect with them online, etc., etc. Those are some of the, among so many other ways you can try to actually avoid actually being caught up in stress. Eating healthy is another example. You need to maintain a level of healthiness because your well-being and your immune system is very much dependable on the nourishment which you gives it. Another thing you can have to try and avoid is alcohol abuse and drugs abuse. Due to this isolation, you will see more people tend to actually go out and try to abuse, engage in more abuse of alcohol and drugs, because alcohol and drugs works as what you will call muting the sense of reality. So it gives you a feeling that you're escaping from reality. But when that happens, you're totally out of control, and in relation to your loved ones and your children, you will not be in a position to actually maintain their safety as well as being caught up in drugs and alcohol. So these are some of the fundamental way you can actually try and engage to stabilize yourself and adapt into this situation.
You're listening to Kenneth Cuvalay, a social psychiatrist nurse, specialized in psychiatry and, addiction and psychoeducation. So Kenneth, when you talked about eating healthy and alcohol abuse or intake, the amount of alcohol intake is a very, very difficult situation, when you consider that a lot of people have their life, a lot of us, our lives was cut out in the sense that, we have a structure. In the morning, we know what to do. We go to work. We know what to do. We come home. We know what to do. And we have our lives in the weekends and something like that. We know what to do. Now, I think one have to, devise, some structure for them, which is, in a way, it is very difficult, because the difficulty with that is that if you're very creative, you can be very busy, but you're in a confined space. You're in a confined space, and it's very difficult to manage stress like that and to be absolutely flourish. But yet you can go out for an hour where you can't go see friends, the way you want to. I mean, also what I noticed as well within the social media connection or conversation is that when people engage in conversation, they don't converse about how their feelings and how they're going through. What I've always, in terms of my social, some groups that I'm more involved in, it's about the things that is happening out there. It's about the news. It's about the conspiracy. It's about the flash news, about the breaking news. It's about all of these and different opinions. So you find out that our personal stress is not talked about. So we all talk about something that we really don't have control over, like you said. However, the things that we do have control in terms of managing and helping one another, we hardly do so.
Well, that's true. And that's why I emphasize on the terminology adopting, because, how hard it may be, we're going to have to try and influence and motivate and stimulate our members of community to adopt a new form of lifestyle in this present time and moment. Again, we don't know when this present time again going to be ending, because as a matter of fact, all indicators are showing this situation with all of the restrictions are for the time being the so-called common norm, which we have to actually adopt to and live ahead to. So indeed, yes, it's important and very important to try and open up each other, because that's a good point you make, because in most cases, a lot of people, or let me put it this way, a lot of cases, you have people who are not in a position to open up and actually express their feeling. So we who are actually in a better position to motivate and stimulate those people, we're going to have to try and motivate them and help them open up in order to hear what they're experiencing at that point in time. And in order to help them, a good indication of what they're experiencing, unless we do that, we cannot engage in helping them so effectively enough. So some of the things we're going to have to do is try to engage and stimulate, or even use particular approach in order how you actually one open up to exchange their feelings. Another way, actually, it may sound kind of odd, but in the psychiatrical field, writing about your emotion and feeling is like you're writing it off from you. It's as if you're expressing it. For some people, this works very well as well. But the situation, like you say, which we are confined in, again, it's a huge, complex, exceptional situation which goes beyond all our structures, which we were accustomed of living into. But nevertheless, we're going to have to actually use other methods and other forms of instrument to try and how people, for instance, engaging and exchanging what their feelings are about. And in that context, we can play into those feelings as they're experiencing them and try to give the necessary advice, those of us who are capable and have the skills of doing that.
But what do you make of the information that is coming through government, sites, government officials, health officials? Right. It's so complicated and it's so difficult to pinpoint what is going on. Right.
Important fact as well, and I've been making it an issue by passing on reaction to the Ministry of Health, and they're expert in that regard. But before I answer that question, I would like to say it's yet need to be seen objectively how the Dutch community is adopting. That's not really clear either. We do know what is clear. from the Dutch system right now as they put this intelligent lockdown, it gives people a sense of that they are not so extremely everything is taken away. Although that can mask at the same time the real fear and the way how people are thinking and experiencing the situation as well. So it's a kind of a danger to it, factor to it still, because people still tend to have this idea, well, we have this intelligent lockdown, our mobility is not that extremely taken away. So it's gonna be okay in due time. But I don't think that will be the case. I think you need to still continually observe the community at large in the Netherlands and see what's going to be manifesting constantly. I don't think it's that simple neither. As a matter of fact, coming back to government website and government reporting, indeed, it's a big problem. They are either very much in contradictable informational forms. One time they will release a bit of information. The second part of information would not be transparent to what they previously said. So that has been constituting a lot of misunderstanding, and also that people are becoming what you will say kind of cynical sometimes about what government has to say. And in that sense, I think it's very important that government with their information should be more transparent and less complicated too when they start speaking about information on their website, etc., etc. On the other hand, the assumption that everybody has access to a website is not also the truth neither. There's a lot of people in our community who does not have the knowledge even to engage in a website or even understand what a website is saying. So there's a clear danger to how government are thinking in relation to our community and people. We are not, the masses of our community are not academics and intellectuals. And even intellectual and academics at times are confused. So, government need to be very secure with how they actually perform as well.
It is true. It is a very conflicting moment, but we hope that your advice and our conversation here will help others. You did select some tracks from some of your favorite artists, and I've got one that you've selected, Ali Fakar Toure.
Live at the Bowser, Savannah Live at the Bowser, one of them, yeah.
Yeah, tell us about, why you select that track and, why you're so into Ali Fakar Toure.
Yeah, okay. Ali Fakar Toure, and when you listen to the strength of his music, and which actually, the strength of his music, and it, at least me, gave me a sense of extreme strong spiritualism and healing feeling. And I think that music in the period and time which we are living in right now, it's a music which instill a sense of calm, but at the same time instill a sense of belonging, and where you can, relate to from a deep, intrinsic form of spiritualism which we have in our genetic as African people, I would say, coming from our ancestral background. And for that particular reason, because of the force of that music based on our intrinsic deep form of spiritualism coming from our ancestors, which most of the time we don't even realize that it's there, but it's there within our genetics makeup, and the healing part of it, and the sense of calm which it present and constitute. I found it very appropriate to choose that form of music.
Well, it is one of also the kora is one of my favorite instrument. And let's all enjoy Ali Fakar Toure here on Fefferity Radio, chosen by my special guest, Kenneth Cuvalay, psychiatrist nurse, a social psychiatrist nurse, and specialize in psychiatry, addiction, and psychoeducation. Let's enjoy Savannah together here on Fefferity Radio.
quitté une vie et ma désir. Mais dans d'autres pays, adieu, ça va. J'ai trouvé le métro, n'est pas un petit boulot, mais je suis un air. Mais dans d'autres pays, adieu, ça va. J'ai trouvé le métro, n'est pas un petit boulot, mais je suis un Yes. J'ai quitté un ami et maldition. Mais dans d'autres pays. Adieu, ça va. Au lieu de nous donner non seulement des bombes, donnez-nous des motopompes pour qu'on puisse quand même venir à nos besoins naturels pour trouver la vie et le savoir et la sagesse.
Soothing. Wow. So soothing. You know, that is spiritual. Ali Fakarture Savannah, chosen by my special guest online, Kenneth Cuvalay, social psychiatrist, nurse. He chose that one, Savannah, and many more to come as well. You're listening to Pschiatry Radio. My name is Freestyle, and on the line is Kenneth Cuvalay. Welcome back again. That is so soothing, so spiritual.
Thank you, my brother. Thank
you know,
you.
In times like this, I mean, that's the kind of music we want to listen to, isn't it?
Exactly. So I wanted to actually also, that factor, that note, I didn't mention it along with a range of other tips which one can utilize in this point in time. But
music.
We know that music has a fundamental effect on our inner being, and it also has a healing effect as well.
Yes.
And like I said, I chose this music because if you look at our ancestral journey, and we as a people still on this journey in many ways, and how we have to continue and go through on this journey throughout the world of Covid-19.
Yes.
I think it's very important that we actually rely on certain elements which can actually give us the strength and forces which we need, coming from partly our ancestral heritage, and also the supreme being or the unknown powers above us, etc., etc. And I do believe, and I experience it as such, and I'm sure, coming from a psychological point of view and how you can be affected psychologically speaking, this music, this type of music will have a fundamental positive effect on our people and community at large.
Yes, yes. I mean, also, what would you say for dancing? Because, you know, I find dancing very, very detox. It's like a detoxifier. You know, it makes you sweat and it loosens the bones. And sometimes that's what I do. I put my music on. I don't have to have an audience, and I would just do some mad moves. Sometimes I was thinking to myself, you're not a young man, but I feel good. What would you say to that?
Well, that's a good way to be mad. Let me put it that way to start with. Yeah. That's a very good way and healthy way to be mad. And I was coming to that as a point, some of the tips which we can use to manage. Mm-hmm. Put your music on and exhale your body by dancing. It do sweat you out. Mm-hmm. And it's a form of training physically as well. Instead of being in a sport club, which is now not really possible, you create your own sport club home with those types of music, and you just actually, you let yourself go and express yourself to the maximum and exhale as such. That's very, very purifying.
Yes.
And that's another way. And at the same time, a lot of people who know me sometime when I'm singing, people will say to me, well, Kenneth, well, you don't sound as if you are singing, because that's not singing. And I would say, well, my singing is from my inner being, and I've been last year to the forest before this COVID came about, and I was singing while I was jogging on one track in the forest, and all of these cows which were standing there heard me singing, and they came all running toward me and gathered there and started listening. So I am very pleased with the way I am sounding for myself with singing.
I tell you what, Ken, you can't just sweep that to me just like that. I mean, you know, you're talking about the cows gathering when you're singing, and then you're listening to us. I'm like, please give us a little bit of line. Is that asking too much right now? Or maybe later on. I was just thinking if you can just drop us a line so that we can all gather and enjoy this beautiful sound from you.
Yeah, well, I have it somewhere in my app. I will find it and send it to you indeed.
Okay.
But all these cows came up. You will see them coming running and start listening to me.
Wow.
Yeah, but the point is I'm trying to make too is that your sound of singing is your sound. So express yourself nevertheless.
Yes. I mean, I always say this, you're so right. People said, oh, I can't dance. I says, no, there is nothing like a good dance or a bad dance. It's about how you feel satisfied with your movement.
Exactly. So, people need to learn to adapt in this situation by using these natural tools which they have. It costs you nothing. All you need to do is start doing them. And that can give a real sense of relief at the same time.
I mean, also, we've just mentioned music and dancing. I mean, what would you say, you know, the ways to relieve stress and anxiety and a way to help so that we can help each other open up and express themselves?
Well, to help each other open up, like I said before, you have those who will open up and be actually from a natural way, they will express their feelings. But you have a lot of people who are not capable or even having fear to express their feeling. And in that sense, we who have their capability to engage and stimulate those people from a low level abroad.
I tell you what we do. Sorry, Kenneth. I tell you what we do. We go in for a short pause.
For Africans here, it's not healthy for us to stay here all winter. That's a real problem for us because we need intense sunlight all of the time. And the darker you are, the more vulnerable you are by staying in dim areas of the country and not getting adequate exposure. So I have found ever since I healed myself of cancer in '86 that I cannot stay here through the winter. I actually feel the strain and I feel the dipping into my reserves of energy. So I just go to the tropics where I was indigenously born and created to be and get sunlight.
Original.
Prosperity Radio, your nostalgic station.
se ka wuli ni yɔrɔ in na Jabate. Nege min kan yi ya famu de kamina amani sela de Jabate. Wala nege Buranado.
Figures there from Africa, Ali Fakar Toure and Tumani Diabate. Debbie. Welcome back, Kenneth Cuvalay,
Thank you.
Social psychiatrist nurse here, all the way in Netherlands. What's the time over there at the moment, just for our listeners?
The time over here now is approximately 21:10.
Okay, well, we have 8 here, 6 minutes past 8 or 7.
Right.
Yeah. So that is another beautiful choice as well. I mean, Ali Fakar Toure there and Tumani Diabate. Beautiful.
Very, very, very beautiful, yeah.
You know, when we talk of stress and anxiety, it's like very similar. Sometimes it's very difficult to differentiate if one is really stressful or suffering from anxiety. What is the difference between the two?
Now, the big difference between the two, and to start with stress, again, the body has natural way of actually trying to prevent a person from getting harm. For instance, stress is the body's reaction to harmful situations, whether they are real or perceived. When you feel threatened, a chemical reaction occurs in your body that allows you to act in a way, for instance, to prevent injury. This reaction is known as fight or flight or freeze. You know, it's a form of the stress. It's the stress response to escape. The problem here, which we are dealing with COVID, the situation of COVID-19, if it's developed by people into anxiety, then we are speaking about people having a sense of, again, impending danger, panic, or doom. And then you see people can start developing general anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder, for instance, especially if they had an underlying medical history of these issues again. And the worrying would be about a lot of different things for a long period of time. And so if you look at stress, the sense of the body is to how you have some control. Mm-hmm. But anxiety and the depth of the impending danger, which is based mostly deep going down to a doom sense of thinking or experiencing, you have no escape or you have nothing in control at all. So there's a big difference between the signs which could start manifesting, which you can when you speak about anxiety, or that rather versus the stress situation. Although I said before, the two overlaps each other at the same time.
Right.
So, but you need to know what you're dealing with.
So stress can cause one to be anxious, or when somebody in a state of anxiety can also create stress within that.
Yeah, well, already if you're in a state of anxiety, you have stress already, but it's in a more complex situation. If you're stressed, that doesn't mean to say you're in a state of anxiety. That's the difference.
Right.
Because again, the state of anxiety constitutes panic attack, doomsday form of thinking, which lasts for a long time. So if you are stressing out now and you reach to the point and you have these underlying, say, medical issues already, it can, and you have been treated for these issues, which actually one is stabilized on with medication, etc., or different forms of therapy. And in this present situation, you're not getting that attention. The anxiety can manifest more acute and more intense.
Right.
So we can help people who are dealing with stress, being stressed out more easily, by giving them psychoeducation and forms of tips how they can recognize factors which can lead to stress. And we can give people that kind of education and information. Like I said earlier, preventing complex amount of overloading yourself with information. Those kind of a thing. Again, another thing which leads to stress is the loss of job, for instance, increase in financial obligations, these kind of things, chronic illness. So people who are in an underlying history of illness already and are in this kind of a situation and not getting the direct attention, this can eventually trigger anxiety to a more stress will more develop into a more deeper complex problem mentally.
Yeah. I mean, also, we mentioned earlier on about eating healthy or healthily. And you look at also in terms of, say, food. Can food cause someone to be stressful? For example, especially in this time, where you have us eating frequently than we normally would. In that case, where we just eat because we just eat, we want to just eat frequently. Is this part of stress, underlying stress level?
Well, the eating more frequently in this situation is because of isolation, possible limited mobility as well. So you have very little social system which you can apply to. So you're in this isolated situation, and that way you're seeing among a lot of people now is either the TV or the telephone with overload of information. And when that's not enough, people start eating because of the stress factor. They are looking for solutions. And one of the things people think to relieve their stress with is to start eating or drinking. And I said that earlier already. Alcohol abuse and drugs could increase. More importantly, alcohol and drugs do mute your sense of reality. So people are having a more sense of escape from reality. And there's that constitutes an extreme danger because you are not focused anymore and you are not actually having your control of your system, family system anymore. And you are out of control because of your consumption of alcohol and drugs, which basically mute your sense of reality. On the other hand, those people who are not using drugs or alcohol are not looking for that as such. People will start to eat more, and wherever your health, that constitutes another threat to your health because a lot of our people are suffering from overweight already. That is known in our community. Having diabetes, high blood pressure, etc., etc. So when you are having these underlying medical issues, eating more and consuming more by eating food and probably using ice creams and all the rest of it which goes along with it, do constitute and impose extra danger to your well-being in that sense.
It does. And it is very, very difficult, because also I look at an also point of anxiety there is that, I mean, we're not at work now, so the money that usually coming in at a very constant basis is not coming in anymore. And the more we eat constantly, the more we want to fill up the shelves and the fridge. And the money, I mean, not having enough money to go around also will cause anxiety.
Exactly. That's why I said the financial factor is a stress factor which can lead to anxiety already, because it would be a pending danger which you are having in your mindset, and that can also develop to more extreme behaviors and form of mental expression or acting out, which is not healthy for the person at that point in time. So the financial deprivation is a big problem of itself.
I mean, also we're looking at that problem there, the lack of enough food at home, the lack of not enough money to go around on a daily basis. We're looking at possible anger will lead to possible anger and aggression in a lot of homes. As
well. So you will have anger outbursts. You will have domestic violence, like you call it, not intended to be domestic violence, but you are then, because of these anger and the cause of stress, you are then actually acting out on or projecting these anger and stress more or less on the people close to you at that in those situations. So it always the limited situation of mobility and limitation of financial how much I say having financial means to meet these demands constitute constantly the danger of slipping into more fear with the necessary stress buildup. And if you have underlying tendencies already to go into a more, say, mental form of disorder, you then go in a deeper form of a mental illness. And these are a lot of these issues which we need to be very much careful about, and people has to be very much be educated right now in this point in time with social skills in order to give them coping skills to deal and to with this situation, and to recognize where they are heading to in order to prevent themselves from going over the edge.
Well, I mean, what sort of advice you've got for them? Because, there is not much money. There is not, much food in the house. And there's limitation in how many times you have to come out to go exercise. So in terms of the impact on our health is greater than probably the prevention of the virus itself. What sort of tip or advice would you give to people who are really struggling in those areas, like financial, economic, and mental?
It may sound a bit demanding on the people the advice, but one of the advice, take for instance, you said the time people has to go outside and actually it's about a half an hour. I will suggest an hour. I will suggest to people to use that hour economically, because if they don't know how to go to and is that related to going to the supermarket, or you have an hour time to go outside?
You have an hour to go outside and do your exercise.
Right. I will advise people to utilize that to the fullest and in a sensible form, whether it would be jogging somewhere within that hour, within the boundaries, enjoying the surrounding of the sun or the trees around you, which has a tremendous a physiological effect on your well-being. So, within, again, I come back to the adopting, and creative skills at this point in time. We're going to have to put more emphasis on these particularly tools as we have them to our disposal. No matter how limited they may be, they can be used in a very enhancing and positive way, actually, to deal with the situation. Again, I go back to music. They can take their music with them outside and enjoy their music even more while they are walking or taking a stroll down the street. Another thing which inside your place, candlelight has a tendency to give you a sense of calm at the same time within your house room, etc., etc. And coming back to the financial element, I think people gonna have to learn to prioritize, which is most important for them to be buying with limited amount of financial resources. So, you're going to have to look at what's really relevant or non-relevant. I wouldn't advise people to go out and buy shoes and clothing at this point in time.
Well, here you
not
can't.
Really necessary.
Here you can't really go outside to buy that unless you buy online. But all the,
okay.
Yeah.
Good. So those are some of the tips. And again, write down if you are not in a position to have to somebody around you to speak to. Those who have people around them as a third person, you can actually engage with those people and exchange your feeling, etc. And those are some of the very much important tips. Again, and avoid distraction from being focused on the things which are important right now at this point in time, and accept again that a lot of people tend to want to have to be in control of this situation, but you're going to have to accept that there are events that you cannot control, and this is one of them. I don't know if there'll be a point where we will be able to control it, but at this point in time, I'm not seeing the possibility that we can control the shutdown or do anything about it. So we're going to have to adapt and use the possibilities and the instrument or the tools within there as effective as possible.
I mean, I've heard about you're talking adaptation, and also I've heard in other mediums that in some parts, I think in America or the world, people are protesting. And people are not complying at all and I think what I've heard also is that the idea of a lockdown, it's virtually very complicated with any clear means of where we're going. So therefore,
right.
All it takes are compliance in order for that to work. And at the same time, I mean, people are going through, I mean, there are different protests around the world as we speak about this compliance, and I think the whole idea about the adaptation and comply is about how we sort of give our acquaintance to power that makes it sustain itself and continue to put us in this sort of state that we are in.
Yeah, that's very much a political issue to an extent, and I do agree with you. But what I personally are not gonna chant right now that how we should give civil disobedience to the situation, because there is a notion of where you're seeing a lot of contraction of this virus, which is affecting, like I said already, the African community globally. If you look at New York, for instance, in the USA, 29% of the Hispanic make up the population, and yet within that community, the rate of death due to this COVID-19 right now is 34% of the total death. 22% of our African community makeup is 22% of the population is African American, so as they call themselves. And yet, within that capacity, we are seeing 28% of the total death are Africans American. So again, what I'm trying to say here I cannot be responsible by saying to people, go out and be obedient to some of the structures of rules right now. We need to look at our safety and our health safety in the first place, and how we go about breaking the cycle of sustaining power on the communities. That's something we're going to have to look at as we go forward with the necessary broader vision as to how we as a community in the broader sense will try and tackle and break this gridlock which we are talking about, which we are confined to. But at the same time, we need to consider the safety of our people too at the same time. And most vulnerable again are our community in a lot of cases. If you take Michigan in the U.S., for instance, 14% of the population is African American. And in that state, Michigan right now, 47% of the total death is African Americans. So there's this question about safety of our people or at community broad versus how we're gonna go forward and actually break through the cycle of the grip which it has on society, limiting rights, limitation on mobility, etc., and a lot of our freedom is being taken away at the same time. How we deal with that, we gotta be very careful at the same time in relation to public safety and our people at the same time. So I think we need to look at it, yes, but how we organize it and how we go about it, it needs to be with a broader form of vision so that you can be successful.
I mean, I'm just going to ask you this, not saying you have to answer it, but say, for example, there are 10 or thousands of people in the street of the Netherlands after, when the lockdown is on, and you see automatically like 10 of thousands of people in the street. Will you join?
Well, I would join depending on the protest, what the protest is about. I mean, if the protest is about something which isn't
we want to go back to our jobs.
Okay. Well, yes.
We want to go back to our schools.
Go back to our jobs and our schools, yes. And with the necessary safety mechanism which should be in place, because our government are responsible to make that possible. So yes, I would join that protest, yes, and help to strengthen it. But again, it has to claim and demand certain form of safety mechanism at the same time, because what you don't want happening is that your children would be in school and you're on the job getting sick neither. So we are living in a situation where a virus out there seems to be killing people constantly at the same time.
I mean, what would you advise, when it comes to healthy eating? Because a lot of the time, especially now, if you have such a low budget, most likely you will not go for the healthy stuff. You want to go for what makes ends meet. So what would be your advice?
Right. Still, it depends, because vegetables are very important. You can, well, in the Netherlands here, I can buy cabbages, for instance, and carrots for a very low price. Things like that. You can buy certain fruits for a very low price. So vegetables and fruits are very important. A lot of people tend to say, well, meat is necessary. It's a traditional mindset how people tend to say meat is necessary. Meat you can do without, in essence, and meat is very expensive. So in that sense, my advice to people would be to buy vegetables which is affordable, fruits which are affordable, and the necessary other things with protein like beans, etc., which can build up your immune system or keep your immune system intact. Those are the things I will actually advise people to more emphasize and put the emphasis on, and avoid buying the chips and the junk food and the cakes, etc. These are things you're not really needed.
Yeah. There's a text message just came in here, from Leon. I'll read it out. Is a question. I'll try and make it concise. It says, do you feel that some people also volunteer? It's talking about volunteering here and the anxiety. Do you feel that people also volunteer to, do you feel that some people volunteer to feel a sense of belonging and to feel like they are contributing to alleviate some of the anxiety and danger? And maybe after the crisis and they no longer can volunteer, may cause extra anxiety and fears, especially those who do not have a job or anything to return to. Also, people may develop phobias of going out.
Well, yeah, that's a very interesting question, and it goes over a lot of area at the same time. Yes, you have people who will volunteer now to contribute to the situation, but it's filling up their loneliness and emptiness at the same time. And at a point in time, probably they wouldn't be prepared to be volunteering and doing the same thing. And the phobia, again, go back to anxiety and underlying mental disorder, because like I said earlier, you have people who can develop claustrophobia. They develop a feeling of fear and having no escape and being closed into a small space, oftentimes result in a rather severe panic attack. And at the same time, you can find people developing agoraphobia, which means to say an abnormal fear of being agoraphobia, then being helpless in a situation from which the escape may be difficult, or embracing that is characterized with initially often by panic, anxiety and fear to avoid going outside, for instance. So these things are very much playing out. Yeah, people are having fear of being inside, and people are having fear at the same developing these phobia for going outside because of the virus. And at the same time, because of the limitation on mobility, people can actually develop, for instance, claustrophobia for being claustrophobic for being inside. So yes, these are some very important factors which we need to know what is the symptoms or the signs before they develop and reach that degree to help in people to deal with their situation.
Yeah. Also, we've seen the impact of this virus on everybody and all nations, but especially, like you made mention of the African community around the world. We've seen the way China is dealing with the Africans. We've seen the way statistics are playing out in America, also here in the UK and around the world about, finger pointing. What do you make of that?
Well, for instance, a lot of it is racism and discrimination, which actually I need to emphasize isn't new. In this COVID-19 situation, it seemed to manifest more, but it was there all the time. We know that within the healthcare institutions and other form of social institutions, there are embedded extreme form of actually racism and discrimination and based on inequality. We know that in a lot of cases, a lot of people doesn't have access to good food, good housing facilities because of these institutions which actually have these bias against people. We know in the healthcare organization and institution around the world that actually there's huge form of inequality. We know that there's a huge form of inequality based on people who have not the resources to have health care, etc., etc. And yes, in China, it seems that China has actually launched a grave attack on people of African descent or coming from Africa, based on the fact that they are the one who is spreading the disease in China. So yes, these things are more exposed now, but these are situations which our African community has always been dealing with for so long.
Indeed. Also, when we look at all of this discrimination that is happening, this racism, and you're saying it's not new. Of course it's not new. But by believing in this virus, where we've seen a lot of complicating journals and information about it, but as African people as a whole around the world listening, just by believing in this virus, do you think that is like playing into our psychic?
It is playing to our psychic.
Because if we know that, there's racism and there has been, viral attack on African people, South African, for example, the appetite, we've seen it. And now, they're talking about this pandemic and there's very conflicting even within government officials, health officials, and as black people all over the world. Do you think by just believing, because it's not something that we've actually seen, we've seen, images and figures, but it's not something that we really have a real account of whether it's real or not. But, however, just believing that this is a virus out there, do you think it damaged us more because we have so much in the default position?
Yes, I do. Because the problem is you tend to overlook the reality of your own situation, which has been persistent for so long. And it's all now related to the so-called virus outbreak. And in that sense, it poses a more greater danger to our social, economical, and health well-being in general. So I think what's important is that we, as a people, globally, again, instead of being fragmented, I think it's a wake-up call for us to look at ourselves more clearly, how we enhance our own strength and forces and work together in order to have a stronger position and front towards all of these different things which is playing out in our face right now.
Yeah, I think it is a time that one have to express themselves, because I think ultimately death has been promised to everybody and, not given the time exactly when it's going to happen. So if that's the case, then why not speak up about how one truly feels about it? And I think all of that is part of our healing process. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. And like I said, I totally agree with that, and I will call upon our people to do that. But you need to do it in a sensible manner and make sure that you're a force which has a collective on the force at the same time. You cannot be able to be fragmented when you start, and although, okay, if you're even fragmented, how you bring all of these fragments together at the same time. So indeed, that is somewhere out there, and you don't know when it will occur and how it will occur to who. So again, what do we have to lose anyhow? We have very little to lose in this case.
Indeed. Also, because the reason I said about expressing ourselves, we've been sort of like nursing what is not real. It's like we've been making acceptance allowances for what is not really true. And our experiences define, something different to what our story is. And by condoling these fears of expressing yourself, obviously will build up as a form of anxiety and a stress, which will occupy part of our being. And in fact, when you look at, all of the information coming up, is coming up from white scientists, even those who disagree with the sense of what a virus is and what a bacteria is, and how viruses can travel. We hear more basis coming from the white professionals, and we see little from the black professionals arguing on the terms of whether to really back it or not to back it. So we always playing sitting on the fence kind of game.
Right. And that brings me right to Nigeria, for instance, who, if you look at what China is doing to our people, I think, is the Minister of Foreign Affairs from Nigeria, who brought out, a press release not too long ago in the past days that, the events which are taking place, in China are not that broad scale and is based on some level of, people who are infected. So in that regard, I totally agree with you. We are always here having this kind of fear and anxiety to take a stand, and at the same time living and putting ourselves in a sense of living in a world of having the necessary illusion in relation to our position. We have to stop doing that. We need, in the USA, like you call it right now, if you look at the commission which are designated to decide how people can go back to work, I don't see any form of African individuals on that, in those commissions. I don't see nobody Hispanic. They're all predominantly white. So this world is still being controlled and being steered by white dominance in totality. And if we as a nation, as a people globally, as African people, want to make some sense of our existence, we're going to have to take a different view and stand on these situations.
It is true, and we're going to continue also doing so next week here on Tuesday, same time. I think next week we're going to look at how to enhance a positive experience in and also how to enhance our spiritual abilities and our well-being. We're going to focus on that next week because, and I think what is going on right now, I think we have been spiritually shy to speak of our own reality and truth.
Again, that's why I chose, particularly again, Brother Freestyle, our African people of spiritualism, which is deep ingrained into our common values of our ancestor, and the music, which brings not only music, but bring along a strength of force and image of identifying yourself with who you're supposed to be as well. We need to start identifying ourselves as individual who we are and stop actually having this fear to even accept your own image as it is. And we need to speak about these things, and we need to engage having a broader social dialogue and communication with our people, how we need to look at ourselves, because we are, as African, our own entity. And as long as you does not accept that as a reality, we are going to remain always vulnerable to the so-called powers of these Western world as they continue to destroy and to divide and rule.
I mean, it's true, and we have to look at that really, because, and I think one aspect of that, it's not really about, chastising people or, but our reality, especially when it comes to Western religion, and I think we've devoted our entire spiritual energy to make it possible. And within those religions, especially Christianity, one thing I'm really very frustrated about is that people never read outside of the Bible in terms of the history of it. However, people also don't read except what is given to them about read this chapter, that. But when you actually look and read for yourself, one of the biggest deception that we as Africans are always trying to make sense of is our Father in heaven, how he created the garden in 7 days. But also when we look into that, Adam and Eve, like I said, if we can agree that Adam and Eve was the first man and woman, fine. We can all agree also that Cain and Abel was our brothers, fine. They had no sister, cool. However, we knew that Cain killed Abel because of jealousy, fine.
Exactly.
And then all of a sudden, Cain went to look for a wife, got a wife, and started producing children. So automatically, for any logical, sensible, normal person will begin to, hold on a minute, but that was never mentioned in Genesis. It's only the garden that God created in 7 days. Well, what about all these women that Cain went to look for? That has actually stood the biggest deception that we as Africans trying to make sense of. And I think because we trying to do so, each time it fails. And who profit is the man in front of them that profited. And now the churches are closed, government have shut down the church. And I interviewed the educational outreach manager for the Society for Protection of Unborn Children. And he stated that there's an article where the LGBT activist Jim, I forgot his second name, however, was behind the mastermind of the church closing down. So how bizarre is that when you've been trained to say, okay, this is bad and that is wrong, and all of a sudden you're conditioned now to look at everybody regardless of their behavior, that is all right. It must be a very traumatic experience from one end of not accepting something that you know is in the Bible to becoming accepting it. I mean, to me, I find it a big, massive constraint and mental. It is very problematic to have a switch like that automatically, especially in our lifetime. What was rejected before in the Bible is now accepted by the church.
It's now accepted.
So,
well, that, again, yeah, sorry.
No, I'm just saying these are what we do. We're trying to make sense out of something that doesn't really have any sense in it. Right? And we forget about the powerful element that is responsible for each and every one. And even they're telling us that if you, to prevent this virus, wash your hand. Water, which is the most purest solvent. We forget the biggest force on the earth. And we just keep worshipping something that a man could just shut down anytime.
Exactly. So again, like you said, this religion issue is also form of captivity on the mindset of our people. I'm sorry, but this is something I have to say, because looking at our ancestors' common value, traditions, and so forth, and norms, we didn't have in our ancestral communities anything called religion to start with. And even if you speak about the Bible and you look at the Bible, then there's a question which Bible you're speaking about, because the original Bible, when I speak about if there's a Bible which we can look at, is the African original Bible, which has a complete different message than what the transfer of translated Bible from so many different translations coming out. You have the King James Version, you have the American translation to it. But by the way, the Americans and the British almost went to war over their version of the Bible, who's supposed to be the best. And in that sense, I think we need to go back to our roots and to our ancestral tradition and start coming and building on those principles as we go forward. Religion has no place in our societies from day one. And the mere fact that you emphasize the forbidden fruit, which was actually described in the Bible, all of a sudden overnight became acceptable. If you look at the ones intelligent, it should seem enough to you to show you how contradictable and how actually a Bible is being used constantly to how must I say satisfy those who want to hold on to their power grip on you, because all of a sudden what was forbidden is acceptable in this situation which we are in right now. I mean, that should tell you something of itself.
It is true. And also what we fail to realize, the Bible is a military weapon. Just like, technology, I mean, they're talking about 5G. These are military weapons. Yep. So it's no different, really and truly. That's why we always pray for the army in church. Since I was little, because it is a weapon. It destroys family. We've seen it. Mothers, fathers. In fact, the Bible disrespects women classically by putting blame on Eve, say she's the one responsible. How dare they? Right?
Exactly.
And we live in a society where we have no respect for our mothers, our sisters. Why? Because I think this is more psychological and it's so subtle, but it's there, where over many thousands years, we still have this notion that women are so untrustworthy, yet we rely on them to give us joy. How bizarre is that?
Yeah. And although if you look at our ancestral form of democracy, if you want to call it that, or social structures, women had a potential role in maintaining and having those societies exist in the first place. To disregard women as such is a very deep form of insult and actually de-appreciation of the role of women as human being in any sense at all, when you look at how the Bible actually is describing the two different individuals. Again, it at the same time is divide and rule in essence.
Because it's a military weapon. The Bible is a military weapon.
Exactly, and that's what's going on now. They changed the instrument from actually going into the air and throwing down bombs on people now. They are using different, more sophisticated, modern electronic forms of weapon, which is the G5 or 5G or whatever you want to call it. And the mere fact that this virus is circulating, there's more to it than one will actually believe. If you look at an explanation of Dr. Rashid lately, how he spoke about how the virologists in the U.S. within the biochemical laboratories somewhere in the U.S. has been manipulating and experimenting with the different forms of virus which happen to infect and how it end up in China, etc. I mean, there's a lot of things we need to go out there and examine and take nonsense from shift nonsense from sense and take the truth and base our action on those truths, because there's a lot of deception and there are a lot of unrealistic things which are being presented to us indeed to keep us in this captivity. So we need to engage and actually do a lot of good research and come up with objective information and protest it and spread it around the nation and organize and as a people, because what is down the road in essence right now, indeed, as you said recently, there's no sense of perspective. All we know that the government is deciding what we shouldn't think, what we shouldn't do, how we shouldn't move, or where we should go, what kind of a right still exists for people. So, and these weaponized instruments are killing people.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're going to look at that next week, how to enhance our spiritual well-being in this time. And I really want to thank you very much, Sir Kenneth Cuvalay, for keeping our time here and giving us some, expert insight into your studies. And next week we'll have you again, where we can expand more into our African spirituality and to decode and try to analyze and represent our own spiritual idea and make it known. So, next week again here we'll be sure we'll have a much more insightful conversation.
Well, good. Thank you very much. And I would like to thank the broader public in the UK for listening to us. And I hope that our contribution with these topics has been some benefit to them and giving them more insight to some of the issues which are playing out around them. So in that regard as well, Freestyle, I would like to thank you and the community at large.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to send you out with one of the track that you selected as well from Vogue Fokature. This is Wale Adu.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Thank you. And be safe and have a pleasant evening, under the circumstances.
And you too. And for those who came in late in this conversation, you will hear it and repeat again on our Mixcloud as Fairity Radio on Mixcloud. Thank you very much, Sir Kenneth.
Okay, Freestyle. Have a pleasant evening and be safe, okay?
Okay, sir. Thank you. You too.
Okay, bye-bye. Until next week. Okay.